Hello and welcome back to the worst War Machine channel on the internet. I'm Malorian, and this is Malorian Weekly. Now, what we've been doing lately is doing a master series on the different win conditions. So we talked about so far winning on scenario, winning on assassination, we hit on attrition, and finally we're on to Deathclock. You know, this little fun here, tappy tappy, go back and forth. A lot of people think it's no big deal, but it is a definite win condition. So what we're going to be talking about today is how you can take this to the next level so you can start really trying to win from it. And I'd say that this is one of my two main strengths. We talked about back with scenario, that I'm definitely a scenario player. But the other part of this too is that I am definitely a Deathclock player. Now, a lot of people, especially when they're new to the game, don't really understand this. They're like, well, Malorian, what do you mean you win on the clock? Especially people that are coming on from like 40K or some other system. They're like, well, what is this? The clock's there just to make sure you finish your game in time. No, that's not it at all. Pretty much assume that your caster has a bomb on it, and if you don't finish the game before that timer goes off, your caster dies. You have a clock, they have a clock. Whatever one goes out first, if you haven't won by a different way first, boom, they blow up. It counts as winning by a caster kill, and that can be the game right there. And I think especially for me, I played 40K, I played fantasy, and I really thought from those like, wow, this Deathclock thing is really, really different and really, really interesting. And the reason I thought that is that, normally all the ways that you'd normally win by say like, hey, I'm going to go and try and kill all these things. I'm going to go and try and capture these different objectives. Maybe I need to kill this one certain thing. No, take that all out. And if you can just stall your opponent and wait for their clock to go out, that's really it. You can be up against a vastly superior opponent who is crushing you, killing all your stuff, scoring points. Maybe your caster's like just barely alive, but if that clock goes over, boom, they're dead and you won the game. And I think it must have been like one of my early games where like a definitely a superior player clocked against me is like, wow, did I just win this game? That counts as a win? Wow, I want to do things to make this happen more. And I think that's a big thing to really take away from this, is that winning on clock is not just because like, oh, one person was slow. There are definite and absolute things you can do to really further the game so that you can win on Deathclock. Now, I really feel that before I go too much farther, I feel that out of all the different win conditions, this is the one that has a bit of a dark side. This is the one where you can take this one to a point where it's getting it so that it's a little bit gray. You could be reported for bad sportsmanship and stuff like that. So I want to really make sure that's clear. I'm going to be explaining that as we kind of go through this. But even if we stay away from those things and you're like, ooh, I don't want to get into anything where like people are kind of really questioning my actions and what I'm doing, there's definitely ways that you can play into trying to win by Deathclock and not really have any feel bads other than from a part like, okay, they lost the game, so there'll be a little bit of feel bads because of that. So the very first part that you might want to be starting then, if you want to decide like, hey, I want to design a list so that I win by Deathclock, is much like we said for any of the other win conditions, is that you have to be thinking about that right from the very get-go, right when you're starting to make your list. That's something that you really want to be considering. So your list will need to be having things in it that will prolong the game. And so what type of elements will actually prolong the game? Well, one of them is going to be having lots of models, right? If there's lots and lots of models in there, there's a lot of things that they have to kill, and it takes time to be moving models, attacking models, and so these things can really add up when it's going on to the clock. So one way you can be taking your list is just be having lots of models. Other ways you can be taking it too is that survivability can come into it. Maybe it's something where you have a lot of armor or a lot of boxes. So sure, you might get to me and hit me, but my armor is so high that I'm taking almost no damage. Or I have so many boxes per point that you're doing damage to me, but there's still more stuff here. Another way you could be looking at this too is a defensive skew, right? If my defense is so high, you can be attacking me and not killing me, meaning that you have to roll again, taking more time, and the more time you're trying to be spending trying to kill my dodgy characters, the more your clock is ticking down and the closer that I get to victory. So that is very much something you want to be thinking about. Even your caster, the spells your caster has, the feat that it's going for, if there's something there that can prolong the game, that's the thing you want to be doing. You're not looking for attrition things. You're not trying to find something where, oh, I want to be hitting as hard as possible. No, you want to be doing something where, do I raise the army here? Do I raise the defense? Do I have something here that slows down and stops the opponent? That's what you're really looking for. Even something like normally where you might shoot out a template that does a little bit of damage but is rough terrain. That might be what you want, right? Put out some extra rough terrain there, slow them down, and if it takes them an extra turn to get to you and slowly move through this, that is more time that is off their clock. So all these things are considerations you should be thinking about just at making your list. And of course, this is a pairing, right? So both your lists probably want to be thinking about that in one way or another. Now, the next thing you need to be considering is when you're going to be seeing your opponent's list. You now see what they have, and so obviously if they have a list that's all about, I can kill lots of infantry really quick, if one of your lists was based on, I'm going to slow these things down by having lots of infantry, it might not slow things down as fast as you thought. If they have a list that hits extremely hard, well, that one list you had with super high armor might not be lasting as long as you thought. So considerations like that will have to be processed so you can make sure you take the right list so it's going to last as long as possible. The next thing you're going to be wanting to do is look at the board and the terrain. And so when it comes to that, whereas like before, it's like, okay, for scenario, what's the best way I can do this so I can protect my zones and I can get there and contest their scenario pieces? Well, now it's more like, what can I do to delay? I'm more looking to be like, I just want to contest scenario. I want to be getting into annoying spots. Is there somewhere where there's terrain that focuses things down to a choke point? Not because I'm trying to trap them while I'm scoring scenario or going for attrition, but no, I just want to narrow things down to slow things down for them to try and like just tumble into each other and be like, oh my God, I'm trying to get through this and trying to be as efficient as possible. And the more that they're trying to be efficient, the more that they're kind of wasting that clock. So those are kind of more of the things you're looking at when it comes to it. Or I mean, just trying to see like, okay, there's some rough terrain there, and I'm not going to use that rough terrain because it's going to be cover for me, but I want them to slowly walk through it. I want it to be annoying so that to be running around it. Seeing things like that, this could be taking seconds off their clock. Seems small, but when you break it down, all these things are going to be adding up and bringing you closer to victory in the end. All right, now that we've done that, we've gotten the right list, we picked the right pairing, we picked the right side and figured out what we want for that. The next thing we want to be doing is we want to be in a spot we're now going to be deploying our army and using it in a way that's going to be slowing things down as much as possible. So what that really means is I don't want to be just running into their face, because if I just say offer like, here's everything, here you go, well, if there's something I haven't really seen there, they could be killing a lot of stuff, and then if I have no models, well, the game's going to be done. Again, I mean, we're not trying to get like a turn 7 victory or anything like that, but clearly the longer the game goes on, the more time they have to use. Even just the basic thing of, okay, I'm going to allocate my focus, upkeep my spells, move this here, move this there, attack. There's a set amount of time that goes for every single turn, and the more turns you have, the more that's going to be adding up. And so when you're playing the game, it's going to be, how can I slowly feed this to my opponent? How can I go and slowly give this so that they will have to activate an attack, and then I'll feed a little bit more, and I'll feed a little bit more, and I'll feed a little bit more. It's not just like a boom, here's everything. It's a slow feed. Really, really trying to push this so it's going as long as possible. Now, in that as well, when you're trying to be doing these things and slowly feeding things to them, you have to be thinking about their win conditions as well. If you're a person that like, okay, I'm going to try and win by clock, well, as I'm doing that, I need to make sure they don't win by their scenario, by their win conditions rather. So if they're trying to go for scenario, I need to slowly clog things up. I want to put things in very annoying spots so that they can't score those points. If I can completely deny it, maybe there's an awesome house where if I'm hiding behind it, they can't get to me and I'm contesting that entire zone. Or maybe I'm just putting enough pieces in that zone that, okay, they're going to score that point, but it's going to take them like a good 5 to 10 minutes to slowly unpack that and kill those things. And then on my next turn, I'm going to do it again. Or maybe they're trying to win through attrition. Actually, if they're trying to win through attrition as a person going for scenario or by Deathclock, I keep on getting mixed up here, that's actually in your advantage, right? They're a person that's wanting to kill every single thing that you have. And so you're going to be like, okay, come on, feed, follow me. You're just going to slowly lead them along. The other one, though, that you have to watch out for is the assassination player. If they're going for assassination, boom, 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 they're always going after your caster, and they might not kill you on this turn, but if you're playing the long game, you're giving them multiple chances to be killing your caster. So you have to make sure your caster is very safe, and you might actually think in this case to try and feed into that as well. Just like how your attrition player is going to be trying to chase you around and slowly eat up all the scraps you're slowly feeding them. The assassination player, maybe you leave yourself slightly open so that they can spend some time, consider it, try and make sure that they can go for the assassination. Okay, they didn't do it. Heal, go somewhere even safer. And, only when you're in a better spot and the math is in your favor, okay, risk yourself again. So they're going to be spending more time to try and kill you. Stuff like that. Now, I think when we start getting into this and talking about how we're leading people along and how we want to try and be enticing people to be doing these things, one of the things that we have to realize is that we have to sacrifice. I was already talking about how we're feeding things to our opponent. And if we're doing that, we're losing pieces. And sometimes that means losing things that it's not going to be getting you any value. I might just go ahead and lose one of my heavies, and it's like, well, my heavy killed nothing, but it took them a full 10 minutes to kill that heavy. And when my goal is to basically kill your clock, the fact that that one model took 1/6 of your clock off, that might be worth it. So sometimes that might be what you look into. It's not about just throwing just enough infantry in their face to slow them down. It might be about giving them a significant piece so that then they'll have to slow down and make sure that they kill it right, make sure they take it out, and things like that. Now, even past that, and this is where I'm going to be starting to edge into things that might be a little bit more greasy, a little bit more dark side, is you could always be doing other things along that to be helping things along the way. So maybe this is something that when you're getting into the game, you're going to be more talkative. You're going to be like, oh, wow, that army looks so cool. Hey, what's that paint scheme? Hey, where did you get that bit swap from? Oh, I really like what you did over here. Hey, did you hear that there's going to be this for lunch? Just being more talkative will really make the game go on further. You can make sure that there's things like tough in your army so that they're going to go and have to spend all that time where you're going to be going and rolling your dice and then you tough. And I mean, like, you can go as slow as you want with like, oh, I think I'm going to tough. And maybe eventually they're going to be putting the clock over to you, but that's okay. You can do your tough. You can send it back. Maybe what you're going to be doing is, even though if I want to be winning by clock, that means that I can't lose by clock, but maybe I'm going to be relaxed on my turn too, because even if my clock is going down, if I can just put out an aura that we're having a nice, slow, relaxed game and get them to be behind, well, then all of a sudden they're getting closer to that spot. I know for myself that I can be going and speeding things up, but if I can lure them in and be like, like maybe start slow and then start speeding up, but not trying to be very obvious about it, they can lose it on their clock. Now, again, that's where I say where we're getting into things like the dark side of this. Like I said, you can slow roll your tough rolls, and maybe by the time they say like, okay, buddy, you're now going to be doing those on your clock, you've already killed X minutes off of their clock. And that can be the difference between victory and losing. But at the same time, that might be something that you're reported to the tournament organizer over. This might be the type of thing where like, look, you're just not making this game enjoyable anymore. I know what you're trying to do. I just don't want to play against you anymore. Maybe it's not a tournament at all. Maybe it's weekly gaming and there's like, yeah, I just don't want to play against you anymore because every single time I'm trying to play this game, you're asking me about my grandmother and how my kids are, and I know you're just trying to slow the game down. So even though there's strategies in here that will very clearly move you towards the victory you want, they might not necessarily be the way that you want to go with that. So that's something you definitely want to be keeping in mind. Switching back to the way that you want to be saving on your clock, obviously you want to be playing the game at the same time and making attacks where they make sense and stuff like that. But if you really think about it, like as if you have like 2 hourglasses that are filtering down and you want theirs to go out before yours does, well, you have to make sure that your clock keeps as much as possible. And just like how we're saying that we're doing things like feeding troops into them, you probably, while the troops are going in wanting to be, you might as well make the attacks, right? You might as well do a little bit of attrition. You might as well do something with it. But maybe not always. Something to consider is low value plays. When, sure, I could be taking these POW 10 gunshots and maybe planking some damage. Is that really worth the minutes on your clock? If that's going to mean that in the end, those couple of minutes is what you're ahead and that they're going to, basically their hourglass is going to go out before you because you didn't make those low value attacks, well then don't make those low value attacks, right? Just like how you're trying to prolong things by like, I'm going to try and not make this main fight happen as long as possible, and I'm going to be keeping my heavies here and be like, oh, when is this big fight going to happen? Let's keep dancing. Let's keep dancing. You got to make sure that that clock of yours is not going down as fast as your opponent's. So I talked about before where in part of the dark side that you want to be relaxing your opponent and making it so that they're taking their time and chatting and slowly doing things and considering things. I mean, you can do that the dark side way by basically trying to encourage that and purposely trying to make them spend long time, but you can also do that in a non-dark side way. You can just make sure that on your turn, you are being very efficient with your time and then putting the onus on your opponent to be doing the same. You can be setting things up or like, okay, I'm going to set up so that there's this heavy threatening here and this threatening here and this threatening here. And then when they take their time to be analyzing and being like, okay, to deal with these different threats, I'm going to move into this position. Okay, I'm ready for your attack. And then you just don't attack and you set up into a different threatening position. So they're like, well, damn, okay, now what are you trying to do? Now that's not something where, like you're going and like, hey, like let's chill, let's go grab a drink and like, trying to run up the clock in BS ways. No, this is a very real thing you can do. And they never know when you could just be switching things over and being like, okay, well, you're trying to waste my time. Let's get in there. And you're like, great, you just walked into my trap. That'll be working into a little bit in our next video where we talk about combining the strategies, but it's going to be a real game strategy that they can't really complain about, right? You're just playing the game as opposed to some of these other ways. So I really want to stress that in this video. I know I had a game that I was playing against someone at a very top level tournament for what we have here, and I was basically going for Deathclock, and I knew the person I was talking to is a really talkative person. I knew that I could just like bring up politics and I could get this person talking for 5 minutes or whatever I needed to clock them. And I decided not to do that. And at the end of the day, they won with just 12 seconds left. But when people ask me like, really, Brian, you couldn't find a way to waste another 12 seconds? Yes, I could have. There are many things I could have done in order to win this game using one of these different options I had to me, but I did not want to win that way. I wanted to win by Deathclock in a more upfront manner. And so that's something that's going to be up to your judgment call and what you want to do, right? Very easily, like let's say something like this. They attack you and you have to be putting some damage onto your card. how fast do you do that damage? You might be even thinking that you're doing that damage as fast as you can, but they might feel at the end of the day like, oh, you know, like at the end of the day, I lost this game by clock. Oh, I bet you when they were marking that damage, they could have done it quicker. So there might be actually no winning with that at the end. Well, you could still win the game, but they still might blame you for saying that you had gone and just delayed the game anyway. So I find the best way to avoid any of that talk is just to completely stay away from it. Or if you're going to embrace that, hell, just embrace it and do it as much as you can. So, but probably, you know, for the sake of the community, maybe just don't do it. Otherwise, once you're doing that and you're getting to the end of the game, you're going to find out one way or another where you're able to bring it down to that 0 on the clock or not. And if you didn't win by that, maybe start looking back and saying like, well, okay, I lost this game, but what could I have done to delay the clock even more? Was there a spot where they took out this heavy too early and then I had nothing to threaten them so they could just more quickly chew through my army? Did I not contest enough over there so they won by scenario too quickly? Did I put my caster at too much of risk so the game was over before I could actually get the clock to go down? These are going to be the things you're going to have to analyze and decide how you want to be doing for the following games. But I think that as much as you would think that, like, we talked about attrition, the person coming into the game that, like, that's their natural way of wanting to win is by kill, because it's a tabletop war game. Deathclock is its own little kind of like scholar's game where what can I do? You know, it's not just a thing where I'm going in there and I'm trying to kill that one model. I'm trying to capture these zones. I'm trying to specifically play in a way that's completely out of the box for many players to try and bring that clock down from the opponent. Some of my favorite wins are games that I won by actually losing or killing no models. I went into them and I just slowly fed things into them, and at the end of the day they clocked. And the funny thing is that my opponents love losing those games because they got to destroy me. They got to kill all my infantry, they got to kill all my heavies. In fact, that's my favorite way for beating new players. I'll just slowly feed them things. They're going to learn the game while they're ripping my things apart and destroying my heavies, and then beep 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 beep, I'm going to win by Deathclock in the end, but at the end of this, it's going to be the best feel-good win that they'll have. Sure, I lost because of this silly clock thing, but it's because I was going through and I was learning the game. And then all of a sudden, where I said that there's this dark side to winning by clock, that's actually a way that you could be using it in a very positive way. So there you go. There's mastering winning the game on Deathclock. As I already hinted to, the next game is going to be going like, you know, the Avatar, mastering all the elements and what you can do when you've now mastered all 4 of these ways of winning the game. Either way, if you had some other comments about this video, please post them down below. I love having those conversations. And otherwise, we'll catch you later. Bye.